Meow, Huples Cat and Wolfie. The armchair prepper reads The Lucky Prepper. This I read years ago and quite enjoyed it and did recommend it. It's more for youth and there will be mega spoilers in this in-depth look at The Lucky Prepper. Now Mackenzie mentioned, and I'm going to mention, the fact that this is really fast, improbably fast. The actual timeline that she uses is one sick teacher on the Tuesday, she doesn't feel very well and she takes Thursday off sick. On the Friday, there's massive sickness and absenteeism at work. Over the Saturday, Sunday, there's huge deaths and overwhelming of society. On Monday, there's a paralysis that breaks out. Nobody does much of anything, they just stay at home. On the Monday, mass panic breaks out in terms of buying stuff. By Tuesday, there's nothing left to panic buy. And on Wednesday, the riots start. I think that is too quick. Really, really too quick. There's also a very absent policing and army reaction to this. There's not anything really being done, there's not anything being said. Motorways, highways have not been shut down. A lot of the things that would be done very quickly by government in a major killing pandemic are just not done in this book. So she talks a lot in the book about the knockers, people that knock at the door. After that, the knocks came fairly often, several times a day. I never answered the door. Some of the knockers offered money to people, but others were quite intimidating. The knockers would not arrive before mid-morning. Again, this is a prepper trope. The bad people, the rioters, the knockers, they sleep in because they're up all night partying, I guess. Don't expect all the evil people to be like that. Expect evil people to be around 24/7 looking for the opportunity. A lot of people will get up, have nothing to eat and immediately go door to door hammering on doors. A lot of stuff will not just happen for convenience. The book needs the knockers not to come till mid-morning lunchtime because later on in a garden it wouldn't be possible for her to garden if the knockers were there all the time. And that's one of the issues I have with the book, is that it's kind of an idealized response. Her garden, her housing setup, because she's in suburbia, is ideal to hide in place. The people who live near to her flee so she can use their homes and their gardens. That's convenient. And I guess you have to look for luck, and as Mackenzie says, it's called The Lucky Prepper because she's lucky. So there's no food in the stores are all shut. Lots and lots of people have died. And she calls her parent and her brother up every day and they won't leave their house. They think they have plenty of food in their house, they don't care, they're staying where they are, and that is kind of nuts. People would not necessarily be that blasé and that normalcy bias like her mom is in that sort of a scenario. Some would, but I found that a bit of a stretch. So I think she got this from prepping. There's only one way into a garden from the road and it's a small gate, so she talks about what she's going to do. My research has suggested three options: camouflage, strengthening and diversion. I could disguise the door so people didn't see it. I could reinforce the door so it couldn't be kicked in, or I could rig it up to look broken and the garden looked wild and overgrown so people would not bother going in. Of course I chose all three. Absolutely. There is no one way of doing anything and everything is going to be a risk. For example, you don't necessarily want to trash your house if the other houses aren't trashed, but you don't necessarily want your house to look good if all the other houses are trashed. You don't want to stand out. The grey person philosophy is that you don't stand out. It's not wearing specific clothing or doing specific things to your house. It's actually making sure that you and your house look normal for the area you're in at the time. And of course unattractive. This part I have fundamental issues with. The crisis seemed to be ongoing, and my strategy of stay in, hide and wait was not a long-term solution. I had been expecting the government to provide emergency food supplies, but that didn't seem to be happening. The electricity supply was now intermittent, maybe things weren't going back to normal. It was near the end of May. So some time has passed and TV and electricity in this scenario for this book are working. It's pretty obvious things are not going back to normal in the near term or the long term. What she needs to do is stop watching TV and acting like normal and actually get into her head that she needs other people and she needs to have a long-term viable plan to feed and warm herself. Now later on in the book, the government does try and distribute food. Weeks, I think 6 weeks after this breaks out, 6 weeks after all the grocery stores start, the government decides to distribute food. Well, I don't think they would, And guess what? Mass rioting overwhelms the food trucks and the food trucks get stolen. One of which actually becomes a key part of the book later on, because the EastEnders actually end up, because there's open water near where she lives, with one of the stolen army trucks full of rations there. So there's like 100 people or more in this travelling group, and like 3 months have gone by and this one army wagon full of MREs is still feeding them quite well with scavenging. Again, totally not realistic. The amount of food one person needs is massive. And yet there are beautiful things in this book. You probably don't have them anymore in North America. I do not have one. But a lot of people, I think in England and Europe, still have them. Things in the front door called letterboxes, and you lift the flap and you put the mail through. The mail person puts it through. And she has one of these, and what she does quite early on is she gets super glue and she super glues the mailbox shut, so nobody can flick it open and look in. And I would have also put insulation into that gap, both for heating and also for noise reduction. The other good idea in this book, which I haven't actually heard, I mean, you know, you can read books like this and you can go, wow. She still has electricity. She actually is going to have electricity, spoiler, all the way through this story. And she's also going to have cell phone service all the way through this story. Again, I don't believe that's ever going to be the case in this sort of scenario. But one of the things she does, and I think this is an important thing early on, if you are having limited power supply that's coming into the home, she actually tapes all of her light switches shut, so she doesn't accidentally, by habit, turn them on when she walks in a dark room, and tells everybody on the street that house is occupied, they may have something. Well, that was a good idea. Now, I've done walkabout videos around the area actually showing you homes that are for sale and showing you how you can figure out if they're actually for sale and are empty or for sale and occupied. Because a home that's empty and for sale in a massive grid down, if it has a fireplace, may well be in a much more attractive place for you to stay than in a home without a fireplace, especially if you're an apartment dweller. So she says this in the book. It was easy to tell who'd gone, the lack of car in the driveway and the discarded objects in the front gardens. In their hurry to leave, most people had made quite a mess. Panic. You are going to bug out unless you're about to die or catch fire. You should do it in a controlled and sensible way, so you don't leave the house looking obviously abandoned. And the stuff you can't take, you want to make really good efforts to secure so nobody who's really looking through the house can find it. One of the posters that described gangs on mopeds who were siphoning fuel from parked cars. Another mentioned packs of dogs roaming around. So that's a throwaway line that comes back later on. But again, throughout this novel, she doesn't really have any issues driving her car in terms of gasoline. She does mention that the pumps aren't working because there's no electricity, though she's getting electricity in her house throughout this entire novel. So she talks about a tiny survival kit she's made up, and I think this is kind of an interesting one. I had a lighter, a safety pin, a coil of tooth floss, and a multi-tool in the shape of a credit card. One of the ones that also contained a tiny knife, scissors, tweezers, file and pen. I also had a strip of hay fever tablets and a refresher bar for energy. Indeed, she does. And out of all of those things, the only thing she ever uses in the entire novel is a refresher bar. And it's kind of important, the twice that she uses it. And I would have mentioned that most of the EDCs I see online, mine definitely does have it. But most of the EDCs online have absolutely no calorie content. They don't have a bar in there or a gel in there or something that will give you a quick 100 or 200 calories of food while you're on the go or in an emergency situation. Like, let's be honest, most of the EDC kits are actually normalcy biased. They're not made with the thought, maybe I'm starving when I'm using this. The other thing that's not covered in the book at all is toilet paper. Toilet paper does not run out, it's never a discussion, it's never an interest. Again, I do think a lot of us were taken by surprise by the great toilet paper scares, and I do think that's something we need to think about. I have cotton and I have a toilet and a manual thing that I can use that's not dependent on the mains or electricity, but most people don't, and I think it would catch them by surprise. Now, she's lucky because she gets electricity coming into her house at least daily for several hours throughout months after there is no groceries in the stores. So one of the things she does, she has this one container, one little bottle that her brother bought her that she can filter water in. And she does not pre-filter any of the water she puts in there, despite the having water with obvious debris in it and obvious cloudiness in it. I can't stress this enough. If you have a gravity filter, pretty much all of them are gravity filters. before you put water in there that's not absolutely crystal clear with no debris in it, you have to use 1 or 2 micro towels to filter out anything hard. Anything solid in the water that you filter will start to jam the filter's ability to function. She never has any problems with this. In fact, with her tiny little container, she actually is later on able to supply a ton of people with fresh water on a daily basis with almost no effort. Again, I think this is written from the perspective of having the gear, having thought about the gear, but has never actually used the gear. Now, around about page 129, the book takes off into Fantasyland. What we have in the book is her bias against government. There is government around, it's local authorities, there is some sort of a national control. There is areas being set up and rehabilitated, and people are being brought into those areas via the army to actually become functional, to actually restore Britain back to the way it was. And of course, the person in charge is often evil. People don't do things because it's a good idea, people do things because they're evil. And again, the normalcy inside of these areas that she ends up in is absolutely phenomenal. Like, it's incredibly normal. Dependent on slave labour from children, and there isn't that many children, so again, improbable. There's going to be massive dislocation in this sort of a scenario for everybody, including the people with the army and the guns and the supplies where it broke out. They are going to have things missing, they're going to have problems. I loved trifle. I hope that the settlement camps had milk and eggs. It was amazing how much of it was needed in everyday recipes, cakes and scones, and even cereal in the morning. Indeed. I haven't eaten those products for years. You don't need those products. There's other products that vegans use that last and are cheap. Get into your heads. Figure out why your supplies can be changed. I have figured out how to get cheese. I have figured out how to get meat in grid down. I don't use those now, but I know that anything I can get that's caloric and good for me, I'll try and get. But I choose not to eat them now because I'm a vegan. But a lot of people who eat meat and dairy are ignoring the fact that there's now large numbers of vegans, large numbers of vegan cookbooks out there, so you can use chia seeds instead of eggs. Chia seeds are a lot easier to produce and a lot easier to store than eggs. Obligatory vegan rant over. Now, she does acknowledge the fact that she's dependent on a single solitary water bottle for all the clean water uses, and this is a good example of that. Mark needed the water, said Freya. I was just getting more. I could see that she had my lifesaver bottle and was alarmed for a second. If she broke it, we'd have no way of getting clean water. But she was using it perfectly. She'd obviously been watching carefully earlier. Yeah, she'd been lucky that she has one bottle, it never fails, and she never loses it, it never gets broken, and that's her water source, her clean water source. Do not allow single point failure. Single point failure would be like, I decide I need a gun for grid down. I have one gun. That gun breaks or I lose it, or the ammo runs out for that one gun, that gun is a piece of metal. If I have one method of heating the house, and that method fails, I have no method of heating the house. I live in Toronto, Canada. That will quickly kill me. Water is absolutely critical. Have a good think. If all you have is a couple of containers of water in the house and a couple of tablets to sterilize it and maybe one mini soya, woefully inadequate. Spend $100 today online, go to a camping store and get yourself 2 decent hiking purification systems. You can spend a lot more on that, and you probably should. But in the here and now, if SHF happens next week, you need to have 2 reliable, easily used methods of filtering water that will last you for months to years. And honestly, the mini soya isn't that. So me and Wolfie are going to leave some stuff for you to read in this book, and I have skipped over quite a few bits of it, though this has been reasonably lengthy. So this is a good book, I do recommend it. It's an A for me, it's not an A+. It is great for one reason only. It's written from the perspective of a middle-aged to older woman living on her own in the United Kingdom. And I think that's a really important perspective. It's not always going to be the ex-military special forces dude who's split up from his wife or girlfriend, who's going to survive and thrive in SHCF and save the girl and get her back. Fantasy is fantasy, and we read novels for fantasy, entertainment and escapism. But if you can also read a novel that has quite a few tips here about gardening and storage and how to cope with no power and keeping vegetables over the winter, good idea to have it. So I do recommend this, and I do think it's a fun book. And that's all from me, the armchair prepper, and my faithful assistant, Wolfie the dog. Toodles. This has been a 2021 Arctic Terrier production.